It's an interesting dynamic when you consider the election betting and the magnitude of a U.S. election, which is once every 4 years. And if you're bringing people into the ecosystem that are participating, whether it's you want to call it betting or whether you want to call it purchasing contracts, who are coming into the ecosystem that aren't part of the ecosystem today for that purpose, for the election, you don't have a do-over, right? You don't get 7 more games next Sunday. You don't get 11 more NBA games the following day. It's a singular event. And if you get it wrong, and if you put yourself in a position, where you're accepting these contracts or these bets and you're exposed on one side or the other, and you get it wrong, you're waiting 4 more years for that next opportunity potentially.
This podcast is sponsored by Pragmatic Solutions, the player account management platform chosen by today's smart betting and gaming operators. Don't let technical constraints delay you from achieving your business goals. Expand your business, boost your margins, and dominate the market in any leading regulated jurisdiction with our powerful, flexible, and secure iGaming platform. Enjoy its extensive marketing tools, compliance protection, real-time data, and a wide portfolio of over 1,000 industry providers. It's time to upgrade your technology. Let Pragmatic Solutions show you the modern approach. Visit pragmatic.solutions and join the smart thinkers.
This podcast is brought to you by Pragmatic Play, a leading game developer providing player favorites to the most successful brands across the industry. With an award-winning multi-product portfolio of slots, live casino, bingo, virtual sports, and more, Pragmatic Play is powering up new possibilities of play through one single API. Visit pragmaticplay.com and discover your favorite every time.
Bingo, bango, bongo. We are back here in the digital version of the Vested Interest podcast after recording, of course, in person for the first time with our fan base over at G2E. Benjie, how did it feel to bring the podcast into life, into person?
I actually liked doing it in person quite a bit. I thought about maybe getting myself and Lloyd on planes down to Malta so we could get together and do this one in person, but decided that the logistics may not allow as such. But it was fun. It was fun for a change.
Brilliant. Well, just for you guys to know, I pre-booked the Madison Square Garden here for March next year for the growth of this podcast, so you can see from our good turnout doing G2E. So you never know. Prepare for the big stage coming up here for sure. We're gonna jump straight into it today. Lloyd, obviously great to have you here as well. I want to start on your side today. We are just behind the door from the US election. We are recording at this point 11 a.m. ET on the Monday morning. Hopefully we can release this episode within the next couple of hours before the election kicks in here. But something new that took place in this election cycle is the rise of the prediction markets. Now, betting on politics here on the European side has been quite prevalent in the last number of years, but it is perhaps something that is new to the American audience. And considering the distrust in the polling in the last election and the election before that, a lot of prediction makers, let's say, are leaning more towards trusting these new prediction markets when it comes to where do people actually put their money rather than just their opinion. So Lloyd, can you just give a little bit of an introduction perhaps about these new prediction markets? What are they? And I guess the big question here is that, what do you think? Who are the most accurate these days? Is it the polls? Is it prediction markets? How do you interpret the election?
Yeah, so not only have there, of course, been prediction markets in Europe for U.S. presidential election betting, but even in recent years, there certainly have been some crypto-based prediction markets that are accessible via VPN to folks in the U.S. So it's not completely new that for the first time ever, anyone in the U.S. is betting or predicting, but certainly it was probably concentrated in maybe more of a niche crypto savvy audience up until now. Whereas more recently, the CFTC provided a authorization for Kalshi and then opened the door to others now to effectively offer prediction markets as futures contracts regulated by the CFTC, which here in the U.S. is the Futures and Commodities Trading and Clearing Exchange, who governs these type of contracts. And so that's part of why you've now seen all these, increased advertisements and social media and print media and talk around it. I think it's important to understand that polls and prediction markets, they do different things. Polls capture and then extrapolate real-time voter intentions, whereas prediction markets aggregate sort of like a confidence-weighted expectation from voters and non-voters. And those are not exactly the same thing. A poll suggests how votes will be split proportionally. If 60% of people walking out of a voting station say they voted for candidate A, we're assuming 60% of all the voters at that particular station voted for candidate A. Whereas a prediction market is really talking about the likelihood of an outright victory without respect necessarily to the margin of victory or something like that. When we say that a prediction market implies a 60% chance of a candidate winning the election, it doesn't mean we think they will get 60% of the votes. The expected value is not the value that you expect, especially in the case of prediction market betting. It means that if we held the current election under similar conditions many, many, many times, one of the candidates would win in 60% of those elections, and the other candidate would win in 40%. That is what it means to have implied odds of 60% on a prediction market. And so I'll stop and pause there and certainly let Benjie chime in or go forward with any questions. But I think that's a good, helpful basis for differentiating what polls do and what prediction markets do, and therefore how they should be interpreted, particularly for the sake of sort of meta level of predictionality.
Benny, feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know that if I have all that much to add as it pertains to the definition of one versus the other. I think that Lloyd has summed it up. And then I think we get into, with an election looming here in the next 24 hours, what is the metric that one can look at for accuracy? And truthfully, the answer is I don't know, right? You have the polls, and they shift and weigh on a real-time basis. The polls do as well, based on whatever poll you're looking at, whenever that poll was taken. And on the flip side, you have these prediction markets that you can go into your app and see in real time on call sheet, what is happening and the movement of the public opinion on it, and who people think will win and who people are backing via these contracts they're purchasing to win. And I guess the one interesting note to add as it pertains to these prediction markets is we aren't looking just at the election. As with polls, we're also looking at individual metrics such as swing states and who will win a given swing state. And, within these contracts that you're able to purchase, it isn't limited to the one metric of the election itself, but many dynamics within as such. So it's a bit of a new frontier because, you have the emergence of legislated wagering in the U.S. Over the last kind of half decade or so. And now all of a sudden for this election, you have the clear emergence of prediction markets. And of course, with Robinhood jumping into the game right now, that becomes a bit of a game changer. And I think the other interesting question that we should all be asking is not just what it all means for this particular election, but what does it mean for the quote unquote real money gaming ecosystem, legislated, regulated, some areas which maybe aren't yet regulated, and where do prediction markets fit within that ecosystem going forward, given that it doesn't require state-by-state approval, it's federally approved. And there are no limitations, to my knowledge, as to in which states you can purchase these contracts. So what does all that mean within the ecosystem looking beyond this particular election as to the longer-term prognosis for companies that are in the prediction market space? And what is that category going to look like over the next month, 2 months, 6 months, year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Which is more accurate, which should be trusted more, hard to say. In theory, prediction markets should be more accurate because they should include all the polls. The polls come out, and then people who are experts in the polls decide how much to weight those into their new opinions. Furthermore, particularly when there are more controversial candidates in elections, oftentimes there are voters who don't want to admit in polls to having voted for a certain candidate, even though they did. So another place you would see stuff come up in prediction markets, but not in polls. However, you have people who are not voting. And don't even live in the U.S. necessarily, who are, of course, part of the prediction markets, as well as speculators in general, who aren't necessarily assimilating the maximum amount of information. They just, as with any type of gambling, often just want to get a bet on. And so I don't know the answer. There are factors, I think, in theory, in a sort of perfect academic world, prediction markets would certainly be more accurate and more predictive, but it is more complicated. I think for the audience of this podcast, it's Benjie's points that are the most important and the things that I think the most about, which is in both directions. First of all, will the DraftKings and FanDuels of the world see that their very customers are participating in this type of risk-on activity and seek to capitalize on it within the confines of their platform? And then in the reverse direction, prediction markets are a great business to be in, particularly if they are federally authorized. But they tend to happen, without the same frequency of a sporting event, or certainly with the frequency that you could spin a roulette wheel. You're doing every 4 years, maybe every 2 years, if you're doing a lot of gubernatorial elections and smaller local elections. And so one would assume that not only will the DraftKings and FanDuels of the world look at how might we capitalize on an influx of interest in political prediction markets, but similarly, and I don't even think this is a hot take or an insight, they have been quite forthcoming about this. The companies who are now in the prediction market business will certainly start, and many of them already have, getting into adjacent areas of real money gaming, or other forms of what I often call competitive entertainment, where people are risking money on various types of uncertain outcomes. And it tends to be the case that when you spend the money to acquire one of these users, it actually is quite economical to keep them within your ecosystem and sell them on many complementary adjacent activities and revenue generators.
Yeah, some astute observations. I think, there's two sides to the argument, right? With people like Elon Musk, who is leaning into poly markets and has been advocating for that being the more accurate way to predict the election, based on the simple fact that people put their money where their mouth is, essentially. And but that is, as you point out as well, Lloyd, assuming that people are taking very rational decisions. Now, that is not always the case. People sometimes put money with their heart rather than their brain, let's say. And a really great example of that is in the last election cycle in 2020, where I did a podcast with Matthew Shaddick, who was the head of politics for Markets. And he was surprised over the fact that 80% of all volume that they took in betting markets at that time was to bet on Trump, right? And so what that meant for them as markets is they have to weigh the odds towards Biden to kind of to weigh up for the potential massive loss that they would be facing should Trump have won. So essentially, he was estimating that the odds of Biden winning in 2020 was around 90% as an odds maker. But because of 80% of all liquidity falling on Trump, they gave something like 60% chance to Biden on election night, just because of the fact that so much more liquidity was on one side. And in fact, that betting event in 2020 was the biggest betting event of the entire year. On the betting market. There were a lot of nervous executives of the industry at that time who would have not had the best day if Trump would have won, for that reason, that there was such a massive amount of liquidity on the side of Trump. So again, the odds, of course, will shift based on the demography that is betting. And in terms of crypto, you would probably find more of that kind of like the younger internet generation centric males who would probably fall more on the Trump side, and therefore you see more liquidity falling that way. That will influence the odds. So who knows? I guess we will have to wait.
You know what, Pierre? It's an interesting dynamic when you consider the election betting and the magnitude of a U.S. election, which is once every 4 years. And if you're bringing people into the ecosystem that are participating, whether it's you want to call it betting or whether you want to call it purchasing contracts, who are coming into the ecosystem that aren't part of the ecosystem today for that purpose, for the election, you don't have a do-over, right? You don't get 7 more games next Sunday. You don't get 11 more NBA games the following day. It's a singular event. And if you get it wrong, and if you put yourself in a position, where you're accepting these contracts or these bets and you're exposed on one side or the other, and you get it wrong, you're waiting 4 more years for that next opportunity potentially. So it's a very different dynamic than your typical quote unquote real money gaming sports betting dynamic.
Brilliant. Next topic of today, we're going to move into the world of sweepstakes, of course, where the debate is really heating up. And I get the feeling, and I would love your opinion on this, but from a European perspective, it really does feel like the industry over in the US is kind of dividing itself into two, where part of the ecosystem is moving towards the sweepstakes and, let's say, the alternative ways to enter the industry, whereas another part of the industry is moving more towards the regulated space, let's say. But in a rare case, the tribes and the regulated operators in California are uniting in this Marvel-like partnership to fight the sweepstakes operators over there, with Victor Rocha of Indian Gaming Association publicly saying that if there's anything that the tribes love, it is a good ass whooping in relation to taking the fight against the sweepstakes operators. I would love, Lloyd, to hear your thoughts here, just on the future of sweepstakes. The big question at G2E that everyone was asking is, does sweepstakes have a future? Sweepstakes casinos particularly. What's your thoughts on the current lay of the land?
It's interesting. These sweepstakes casinos and sportsbooks have been around for a little while now. A lot of industry insiders in the U.S. have been investing either pre-PASPA or immediately post-PASPA in opportunities like this. It seems like somewhere maybe it was at SBC Lisbon, I don't know, somewhere right around SBC Lisbon at the end of September. It seems like everyone in Europe got turned on to the topic of sweepstakes in a way that they previously were not. The influx of inbound interest that we have had in, the last 6 weeks here from corporate and venture capital and even institutional hedge fund investors in Europe who are saying, hey, we're hearing about this sweepstakes casino thing for the first time. We need someone, who's kind of boots on the ground to explain it to us. I don't know what it is, but something certainly seems to have catalyzed a massive uptick in interest and awareness of the sweepstakes business model in the US among European stakeholders in the last, again, like six to 8 weeks. Also, over that time, perhaps coincidentally, perhaps not coincidentally, some of these, frictions have heated up and, maybe hit not quite mainstream awareness, but some, social media back and forths and various white paper postings, I think, have started to enter into the, consciousness or awareness of more stakeholders in the space. And so my perspective, more than anything, as an early stage investor who's looking for disruption that no one else is yet looking at. I've said on this podcast many times things like, we look for founders who tell us what the next big thing is going to be and why they're best positioned. And often if there's a buzzword for it, it's probably too late, not to make money, but maybe too late as a seed investor to make money. And I start to get some of those feelings about the topic of sweepstakes as relates to new, fresh capital going into, newly formed pre-seed and seed companies. That's not to take away from the massive financial success that many of the, pre-IPO or, just late stage profitable private companies in the space have had and the dividends that they continue to pay. But the biggest thing that is startling to me is just the number of pitch decks I am getting of new sweepstakes companies, of people adding sweepstakes to a business model that previously did not allow for it. And it just suggests to me that it's probably become a bit overcrowded and oversaturated from a seed perspective. Again, not to take away at all from the incredible financial success that many of the more mature companies and some of the select few who really do have a differentiated angle have been seeing.
Benjie, I can ask you as well, doesn't this feel a little bit like kind of 10 years ago, daily fantasy sports went through similar legal scrutiny before it kind of landed in the eyes of the regulators? Is it a bit of a repeat here, and will kind of land into some form of adjusted regulation? How do you feel about
Look,
this?
I mean, look, DFS 10 years ago, sure, and DFS 2.0 1 year
Recently.
ago or a year and a half ago, and even to a lesser extent in the present, right? So, look, sweeps is obviously the buzzword today. To Lloyd's point, in the last kind of, I would say more 3 to 6 months, we've seen just the emergence of it in terms of the recognition on the European side and on the investment side, and people who aren't as close to the space hearing all about it and asking all sorts of questions about it. But it's not a new dynamic. And, is it? It's certainly part of the present. How big a part of the future will it be? I guess remains to be seen. But as with other components of real money gaming that aren't legislated on a state by state basis, there's going to be growing challenges as it finds its sweet spot within the ecosystem. And what does that mean for sweeps? What does that mean for DFS 2.0 and any other components that aren't necessarily part of the current state by state legislation? Ideally, you find a regulatory framework in some capacity moving forward. Is that achievable? What does it mean? What does it look like? I'm not sure. But it's what's happening right now with California is making a lot of waves. It's not entirely new. We've seen it with some. So there are select other states that have proposed some limitations to sweeps based on specifics of what their state law is, and we've seen that in other states in recent years. It looks like we're going to face some of those questions now in California, potentially in other states. So, look, we'll see how it all plays out. One thing that I will say, and this is maybe even a slightly off topic, I think it's all well and fine to debate these things, and I think it's all well and fine if you have a stake in the game to position yourself one way or another and take whatever legal and have whatever conversations you need to have. But to start attacking people, as we've seen in some instances, without naming any names in tweets and on social media, and going after select individuals who are respected people, I personally am not a fan of that. I think it's something that we're all better than, and something that should come to an end that we should stop with. But exactly how it will play out in a given state based on the laws of that state, I think it remains to be seen. But to me, it's not anything that's particularly new. It's just something that's getting a lot more attention now than it did perhaps 6 months ago.
Yeah, our reporter Zach at the Nexus Zero went so far to call it a civil war that is breaking out within the industry in the US. But Lloyd, over to you. It seems like, of course, there are class action lawsuits taking place in several states, but it seems very unlikely, I would imagine, that there will be a federal ban of sweepstakes casinos. So we are talking about state by state. And just like it's been very difficult to pass legislation for online sports betting and gambling in every state of the US, because different states have different priorities, right? It seems very unlikely that all the states would individually regulate against sweepstakes casinos. So isn't there, even in a worst case scenario, isn't there still place for sweepstakes, but in just lesser states, let's say?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think sweepstakes has quite a strong letter of the law defense, stronger than most people realize in most states, in terms of how well codified the idea of running these sweepstakes games are into state law, and how big of an upheaval would need to take place to change those rules. A few comments, though, perhaps. First of all, there are a few states already who have mentioned that they are drawing a line between what they call games for game's sake. And what they mean is that a sweepstakes must promote something else rather than just itself in order to be eligible for the carve out under that state law. You could imagine, maybe similar types of reinterpretations taking place either at the legal or commercial level. The bigger factor, I think, comes in from the tax collection side. One of the areas of controversy in this space is, when DraftKings gets a deposit from a customer, they don't record that as income and pay tax on that income, because it's not income. It's a deposit. It's a customer's fund that is being held in custody that can be withdrawn at any time. But technically, the entire way that the sweepstakes companies make use of their carve out is by saying that you are purchasing digital tokens. You're not making a deposit. You're making a purchase. And if you're making a purchase, then usually, even if you don't have to pay gross gaming revenue taxes, you have to pay state taxes. And so once you get the ire of tax collectors, a very large governmental organization that has you in their crosshairs, I think can find ways to make your life quite difficult if you are a U.S. entity, maybe a little less so outside of the U.S. And it's why I think it could put some folks in a precarious position were some senior lawmakers, tax collectors, et cetera, ever to really set their eyes on some of these operations. But a point I will make in defense of many of these companies, or at least in refutation of the class action lawsuits, I will say I find them fairly objectionable when you think about what is actually taking place there. Most, if not all, of these class action lawsuits follow the form of a customer who lost money gambling or playing on a particular website, hires a lawyer or gets induced by a lawyer to hire them, and say, I should not have been able to lose that money because this was an illegal gambling website in the first place, and therefore my losses should be credited back to me. That is generally the form that these class action lawsuits take. And to me, that's just incredibly disingenuous, because all the people that are playing on these sweepstakes casinos are quite happy to enjoy the winnings and the jackpots in the cases that things go well, and almost certainly are, perhaps with some small exceptions, they are sober-minded, free-willed adults who are making, a decision with their own funds, and only because then it did not go in the way they wanted financially, or again, perhaps because a lawyer who wants to put their name on a class action lawsuit plants this idea in their heads, do they then make the claim, I shouldn't have been allowed to play that hand of blackjack anyway because your website is illegal. To me, that is just such a disingenuous, litigious subversion of what the legal system is meant to do. I think there are plenty of good arguments about why DraftKings and FanDuel, for example, should be upset that they pay all this money for licenses and gross gaming revenue taxes and others don't. And there are a lot of fair things to point at. But I would just note, in defense of the sweepstakes companies and the DFS companies who receive this as well, I just find the class action lawsuit angle on this to be pretty disingenuous and objectionable.
I think that's a great point, Lloyd. And this is what we are seeing within the industry over in the European side, also where in jurisdictions like Germany and Austria, and now Sweden and others, where players are claiming back losses from the time where operators were operating in those markets without a local regulation, without a local license. Now, the world sometimes is a bit upside down, because what that opened up to as well are online casinos that are claiming back winnings from players as well. And we actually had a court case where a player had to repay a win to the online casino based on the same principle. So very strange, and as you point out, not what a legal system should be. To the third and final point of today, I gave a talk a couple of days ago in regards to entrepreneurship and how we as an event company navigate the COVID, where, of course, because of the public lockdowns, we lost all of our events and all our revenue, and how we as a business were able to fight through that time. In the follow-up panel, a young lady raised her hand, and she asked, it's all well and good that you talk about, keep on fighting and how to motivate yourself to keep going, but when do you decide to pull the plug? And it's a really great question, right? Because any self-help guru or any kind of strong-minded individual, and all the stories that we hear about these kind of successful ventures where they had everything against them and nothing seemed to indicate that you were going to be able to survive a particular situation. But because we fought through and we believed in ourselves, we were able to get past that moment. But there are, of course, many times where the writing is on the wall, and the best thing to do for a business is to put up the white flag and move on to do something else. So, Benjie, I want to talk to you on this note. Have you experienced this perhaps in entrepreneurs or businesses that you have dealt with? And have you ever had to tell an entrepreneur that it's time to pull the plug? And do you have an idea or any thoughts or principles on when it is time to actually start thinking about that option?
Yeah, look, I mean, to me, this is a bit of a complicated topic, right? And it's not a one-size-fits-all topic for sure, because everything is situation specific. And every company has its life cycle and each action leads to another action, and it becomes a collective. And obviously, everyone heads into their companies that they start, particularly if they're raising outside capital, with I would hope the best of intentions. And sometimes it goes really well, and oftentimes it doesn't for a variety of different reasons. But you don't just wake up one day and out of the blue say, "Hey, I'm not feeling it." As a founder, it's time to pack it in, throw in the towel, and hey, guys, I gave it a shot. It's just not working. Thanks very much, and have a great day. Believe it or not, I have seen that, and that's really not the way to go about it and the way to do it. And, I think that as a founder, particularly if you're taking outside capital, right? And I think there's two different scenarios. If you're bootstrapped the whole way, you do what you want to do. But if you're taking outside capital, you really, in my mind, got an obligation. If I were taking outside capital for the two of you and starting a company, all throughout my life cycle along the way, I'd want to ensure that we're on the same page in terms of where we're going and what we're doing as a company. And if we're getting into a point where things are turning the wrong way for whatever the reasons are, as a founder, my number one thought process and obligation would be not so much for myself, but for the two of you and the capital that I took from you. And how do we maximize that situation to create the best possibility of some sort of an ROI for you guys, or to recoup some of the funds for you guys as the investors into my company. So look, I don't think you just wake up one day and throw in the towel. I think it's a scenario where, as a founder, if you see things aren't going the right way, there should be ongoing communication with your team, with your clients, with your advisory team, with your investors, as to what are the best steps that we should take, even if I'm not long-term going to be involved in guiding the ship forward, or even if this idea isn't the right one and we need to pivot it towards another direction and or wind this down in some capacity. You don't just necessarily wake up one day and say, we're going to wind it down. You look at every other option and exhaust every other option to not make this a zero for everyone involved, including yourself, before you get to that stage. So I've kind of gone in a bit of a circle here, but I think that the point that I'm making is that, you don't just wake up and wind it down. You look at what are the options, and is there another home that could be a fit for this thing, even if you as a founder won't be involved moving forward. So I'll stop there, and more to add, but I'll turn it over to Lloyd.
Yeah, I think once, especially if you're a young founder, once you get past a certain point, once you raise the third bridge round that you told your investors you were never going to raise. You raise your seed round, you don't quite get to the A, you raise a bridge round. While you're doing that, you tell your investors if you can't get something done on that bridge round, you'll probably look elsewhere. You don't get anything done, but you go back to those same investors, you raise another bridge round. Then maybe you get to that third bridge round and you say, guys, this is really the last one. If we can't get to some product market fit from here. And you start to do the math and you look at the liquidation preferences that have stacked up, and you maybe even start to realize that even if you do, turn the ship around or just have some incredible ninth inning success, that perhaps as a founder, your financial upside is still relatively limited, particularly when you do some math where you divide it over the number of years that, you were working on the startup, and maybe compare that to a salary that you could have been making in tech. And what I often tell people, and I think not enough, especially first-time founders, realize is once you're relatively in that zone of things where you're either thinking about shutting down or winding down or stepping back as CEO or selling in a fire sale, whatever it is, most likely for you personally as a young founder, the greatest ROI that you will get from the next 6 or 9 or 12 or 18 months of work has nothing to do with a specific financial outcome from that company. It has to do with the combination of being overly communicative to your investors and potentially going down in their eyes as a 99th percentile founder in terms of who fought so hard, went down swinging, was overly communicative about things in tougher times. I think you could sell an investor more on how you handle those tough times sometimes than you can in a pitch deck with all the optimism of the world. And then secondly, getting a win on the scoreboard, even if it is a all stock deal that is entirely paid in the earnout so that there is nothing paid to you up front, but you get to announce that your company was acquired by such and such. Maybe some of your investors get to similarly save face, Perhaps you do get some back end equity in another enterprise that does give one last chance at some form of passive success for your investors. Those two things, how you handle the communication and aggressiveness with which you attempt to save the company in front of your investors, and then hopefully the success you have even in obtaining a just a surface level victory that does not net you financially anything personally in the short term. I think those two things will benefit you as a founder financially more over the next 5 or 10 or 15 years of your career than anything that you could possibly do to try to extract a few more dollars out of that company. And I don't want to say many, but some founders who even do find themselves in fire sale situations, at the finish line right before the fire sale, they decide to trade in a lot of that credibility for some short-term economics. And they say to their investors, you know what, I'm going to hold up this deal and everyone's going to get nothing unless I get a few extra dollars out of it before I sign on the dotted line here. And sometimes that works because investors would rather, in some cases, begrudgingly give up a little rather than just getting nothing. But that almost certainly compromises all of that other value that I described. So I don't have as good of an answer as Benjie about thinking about the decision to shut down. But I do think that there is an opportunity when you do find yourself at that point in time to really show your investors what you're made of, what kind of communicator you are, how much you value transparency, how hard you'll work to effectuate either a financially successful transaction or at least a reputationally successful transaction. And I think there are just too many founders who, after 5 years of putting their blood, sweat, and tears into something, they actually fail to capture the best ROI that they could from that work by maybe not handling things in the optimal way in those final months while they are considering the topics that Benjie articulated quite well.
And I think I'll add one or two things here to build upon what Lloyd said. And I think if you're a founder, look, if you're a bootstrap founder, the answer is very simple. It's based on economics, right? If you're a bootstrap founder that doesn't have outside capital, then your obligation is to yourself and maybe some clients that you're servicing, right? So you want to do right by those customers that you're servicing. And if you want to bow out of the game and go do something completely different as a founder, you don't feel that this is something that's going to be as successful for you as other opportunity costs, be it another business you want to start or another job that you can take, do right by your clients and make that decision entirely based on yourself because you're bootstrapped. But when you take that outside capital, I think that communication Lloyd alludes to, it is so critical throughout the life cycle of your company, but particularly when things are going the wrong way. I don't think it's just a founder decision. I think it's a founder coming to their advisory people, coming to their investors and saying, guys, here's where we're at yesterday and here's where we're at today. Here's what my thought processes are, but where are your thought processes? What do you want to see? What do we want to see collectively? And I think that you want to incorporate where, as they transparently see where you are today and the challenges that you're facing in finding market fit and in achieving what you all hope would be achieved 4 years or 1 year ago or 3 months ago or whatever it may be, kind of assessing their temperature throughout this process so that nothing's coming as a surprise to anyone and so that they know that you've done everything you can, as Lloyd alluded to, and so that when you're making a decision, and if the decision is to actually wind it down, it's a decision based on a collective or at least partially on a collective and not a unilateral something that would come as kind of viewed negatively by the people that you're in bed with on this thing. And, look, that relates back to the entire concept of partnership with people that you're working alongside. And when you're building that capital, that cap table from day one, ensuring that you're bringing people in who are aligned with your vision. And then along the way, whatever your degree of success or lack thereof is, maintaining that level of communication and that level of trust in one another that you're doing the right thing to the extent that you can in everyone's best interests.
And I think also the dichotomy of just starting a company in the first place and going on that journey as the founder is that should you be lucky enough to have a long lifetime as a founder and as a startup founder, you can be pretty sure that you will face impossible situations along the way. I think you have to be lucky in order to just have this smooth journey of growth year by year without finding yourself in a situation where it feels like this is never going to work out, right? And so just knowing that, you have to be prepared mentally to circumnavigate those situations. And yeah, maybe it's true. Maybe the company won't make it during those difficult times. But if you do everything that you can, that is your obligation, I think, as your founder. But that also makes it very, very difficult to consider a moment where you should pull the plug. With that in mind, just the fact of the matter is that any successful company have gone through those very difficult moments and very difficult situations. So it's hard to find a clear answer there. It's almost like a boiling frog problem. Where,
I think Benjie's point, though, about it being more of a process and a gradual process is so astute and important.
It's like a boiling frog problem.
And I think it dovetails with the need to be transparent, not just to be respectful of your investors, but from a practical standpoint. Guys like Benjie and myself get calls and emails all the time. Let's use iGaming Next as an example. Suppose this was a board meeting here, and we were investors in your company, and maybe I just got off a call with someone who said, "Hey, we're really looking to buy a Europe-based media and events business with a lot of iGaming focus that has, a strong affiliate pipeline and, good database of customers. But we're not really looking to pay that much. We'd only be looking for someone who's kind of struggling and maybe open to a bit more of a desperation type exit." And I would get off that call and I'd get on the call with you. And if I think things are going perfectly well because you're just only reporting everything is up and to the right, and you haven't even suggested to me that you're a little worried about, XYZ milestones, and you might want to even start considering other alternatives, I would probably never bring up that opportunity because I wouldn't want to insult you by telling you that I thought, your company could be an eligible candidate. Whereas if you had instead started that call and said, "Hey guys, look, we're really worried about our growth. We have 18 months of runway. We have plenty of time left, but we do want to start thinking if we don't hit milestones XYZ, that might make the Series A tough. And so, is there a price at which if we got an acquisition today, we should even consider an exit?" Being transparent is not only, morally good and ethically good and reputationally valuable for your next venture. It also is very, very practical. When you have a cap table or advisory board or board of directors who are constantly swimming in waters of people who might be looking to, for example, pick up an asset at a favorable valuation, that's still more than zero and is still an outcome as opposed to no outcome whatsoever. And I think there are parallels to all aspects of transparency and the practical benefits it brings, particularly when, as Benjie mentioned, you do the work early on and make sure you surround yourself on your cap table with the right kind of aligned stakeholders that will be supportive.
Thank you so much, guys. Final question for you here today. What's the strategy during the election night? Benjie, are you following every single movement in every single little state, or do you turn off the TV, close the door, shut off the radio, and just see if the world is still there in a couple of days?
I go out for dinner and follow from afar. I'm not going to sit in front of a TV set watching every single analysis and vote that comes in. But look, who won't be monitoring it? We all will. But that'll be my strategy.
I'm still mourning the Yankees World Series loss over here. It feels like I lost a family member or something. So I honestly can't even think about putting my heart into any other sort of outcome for probably a few more weeks. I don't know. I'm struggling over here, I got to say.
Well, I wish you guys the best of luck over there, whatever the outcome. And looking forward to the next time. Thank you so much, Benjie. Thank you, Lloyd.
Take it easy, guys. Cheers.